millions have Catalan, Basque, and Galician as their first languages, their mother tongue. And in fact, to exclude the use of these languages in Parliament or in other areas could be seen as a form of discrimination in international law. You use a language, by using a language, you actually give an advantage, a benefit for those whose language this is. Not using a language, and especially a minority language, for example, means you're denying a benefit. Your own language is not used in the same way by the government. And in some situations in international law, that could be considered to be discriminatory. The right to equality without discrimination in international law means that if you have language preferences, the language preferences must be reasonable and justified. And if it is not, it could be in breach of a fundamental human rights in that international law. The rights of millions of users of Catalan, Basque, and Galician should count as much as those of 100,000 or 200,000 users of other languages. Obviously, that's not the case. And I think that reflection needs to be made. Is it really reasonable to not provide the same symbolic recognition and use of languages spoken by millions of citizens of the European Union? Is it only a political decision? Or do citizens in the European Union have rights that should be recognized within the institutions of the EU? There is nothing in international law, and when I say international law, I mean the law of the United Nations, global treaties. There is nothing in international law which prevents a state to determine what will be its official language or languages, just as there is nothing in international law that prevents a state from designating an official religion or religions. We've been actually quite clear, the UN. A state can have one or more official religions. The issue of an official status is one that is left to the discretion of the state. However, this does not allow a state to deny to individuals their human rights in international law because of language or religious differences or religious preferences. It does not allow a government to act in ways that are unreasonable and violate especially the right of equality without discrimination because of linguistic or, as I said, religious preferences. That even if you're dealing with an official language situation, an official language status does not allow the EU to violate the other rights of individuals or citizens within the EU. And I think in some areas of language preferences, there is a strong argument to be made. In international law, European law is different, but in international law, there are situations of linguistic preferences in the EU that I would say are problematic, to use a diplomatic language. They are problematic because they give preferences based on language, which millions of other EU citizens are denied. And in international law, even if it is a situation of preferring an official status language, this could still be discriminatory, unacceptable, if it's not justified. And in some situations, if you deny benefits or access to millions and millions and millions of EU citizens because of EU language preferences, there may be a situation of unacceptable discrimination. So the important point here is that there is perhaps a rigid formalistic approach with European institutions when it comes to issues of language recognition and use. And it reminds me of the Latin phrase, and please excuse my Latin pronunciation, extra ecclesiam nulla salus, meaning outside the church there is no salvation. Outside of an official status, there seems to be not a great deal of protection in European institutions. For many minority languages, it also seems that some form of legal status or recognition is a stronger guarantee for their right, for their use and position in place officially and in various institutions. So without actually telling saying how the situation of the request for Catalan, Basque, and Galician, whether it should be granted an official status, I cannot, as special rapporteur, tell the institutions here what to do. But let me just say that, repeat that it would seem logical to treat the many millions of EU citizens who are users of Catalan, Basque, or Galician, as respectfully and respectful of their identity and languages and cultures, as is done for hundreds of thousands of speakers of Maltese and Irish. Linguistic diversity is the reality of Europe. And one of the reasons that it acknowledges that national languages, many national languages, 24, I think now, 24, are also the languages of the Union. But the linguistic diversity of citizens is not limited only to national official languages. The European Union, I would think, is not only a union of states, but a democratic institution that also represents the peoples, the populations of the Union, its citizens. And therefore, it ought to be a place, as far as possible, of course, it should be a place to represent and be accessible in the languages, as many as possible, the languages of Europe, as possible, as much. It would also signify putting substance to the motto of the EU, of united in diversity or unity in diversity, which, and I quote, signifies how Europeans have come together in the form of the EU to work for peace and prosperity, while at the same time being enriched by the continent's many different cultures, traditions, and languages, end of quote. And that, ladies and gentlemen, does not stop at national languages. It has to include also the other languages, especially languages of millions of European Union citizens.